The widow next door caught me staring while sunbathing. "Can you help me with my back?" She said my name before I realized I'd been staring. Not sharply, not with embarrassment. Just my name, the way someone calls you back from somewhere far away, James. And when I looked up from the lawn edger I'd stopped pushing, she was already sitting up on the lounger, one hand raised to block the sun, looking directly at me across the low fence between our yards like the pause in the conversation was mine to fill. "Can you help me with my back?" she said. "I can never reach the middle." I want to tell you that what followed was simple. It was not simple. It was the least simple thing that has happened to me in 41 years, and I spent most of those years believing I was a man who understood where lines were and why they existed and what it cost to cross them. I was wrong about understanding that. I was also wrong about myself, in ways that took a long time to find the right words for, and I'm going to try to use those words now. My name is James. I have lived next door to Nora Callahan for 6 years. For 3 of those 6 years, she was married to Patrick, who coached youth soccer on Saturday mornings and grilled on Sundays, and waved to me over the fence in that easy way some men have, the wave that carries no agenda, that just means, "I see you, neighbor. Have a good afternoon." Patrick died of a cardiac event on a Tuesday in March, 2 years and 4 months ago. He was 53. He was, by every account I ever had access to, a genuinely good person, and his absence from the street has the quality of a missing tooth. You know something is gone, even when you stop looking for it. I want to be precise about what kind of neighbor I was before that Tuesday in March. I was cordial. I helped carry groceries once when Nora's arms were full and Patrick wasn't home. I kept my yard from becoming an eyesore because Patrick took visible pride in his lawn, and I respected that. I knew her first name and her coffee order. She had told me once, laughing, when we ended up at the same calf counter, and I knew she taught high school English and that she had a sister in Portland she called every Sunday night. I knew this the way you know things about people you see often without knowing them. Accumulation without intimacy. The data of proximity. Patrick died, and I brought food. Everyone on the street brought food that first week. It is the ritual we reach for, because there is nothing else to reach for. You cannot fix the thing. So you bring a casserole and stand in the doorway and say, "I'm so sorry," and you mean it completely, and it does almost nothing. And you know it does almost nothing. And you do it anyway, because presence is the only currency available. Nora thanked me at the door. She looked like someone in the middle of a fall. Not yet at the bottom, not sure where the bottom was. I went home and thought about Patrick's wave, the easy one that meant nothing except "I see you," and I sat with that for a long time. For 2 years I was a good neighbor in a deliberate way. I noticed when her gutters needed clearing and offered to help without making her ask. When a storm took down a section of the fence between our yards, I handled the repair and split the cost with her before she had time to call anyone. When her car wouldn't start one January morning, I heard her from inside and came out and jumped it, and we stood in the cold together for 10 minutes while the engine caught. And she told me about a student who had written something that morning that made her want to keep teaching forever. I listened because I wanted to. I was drawn to her the way you are drawn to people who have been through something real and come out still interested in the world. I told myself that was all it was. I told myself that for longer than I should have. The Saturday she asked about my back. Her back. I mean, her back. The sunscreen. I had been mowing for 40 minutes in May heat, and my shirt was soaked through, and I had not been looking at her. And then, I had been looking at her. That's the precise and embarrassing truth of it. She was lying on her back on a white lounger, with a paperback face down on her chest, and her eyes were closed, and I stopped pushing the lawn edger, and I looked. And she said my name, and I have spent a significant amount of time since then trying to understand whether she knew before she opened her eyes, or whether the knowing was simultaneous with the saying. I went to the fence. She held out the bottle of sunscreen without drama, and I took it. And what she said next was not what I expected. Patrick used to do this. He'd do the whole back in about 45 seconds because he was always in a hurry to get somewhere. You can take your time. I did not know what to do with that sentence. I still don't, entirely. There was grief in it, and permission in it, and a kind of honesty that was almost aggressive in its simplicity. And I stood there with the bottle in my hand for a moment that lasted longer than it should have before I opened the gate and walked through. When I walked back to my own yard, she said thank you and picked up her book, and that was all. I finished the edging. I went inside and stood in the kitchen for a while without doing anything in particular. She knocked on my door that evening. She had a bottle of wine and a look on her face I couldn't fully read. Not quite an apology, not quite an invitation. Something more careful than both. I said something strange today, she said, about Patrick. I do that sometimes. I'm not always sure why I say the things I say. I told her she didn't need to explain. She said, I know. I wanted to anyway. I let her in. We opened the wine. We talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with Patrick or with sunscreen or with the specific charge that had been in the air across my fence that afternoon. And when she left, she said good night in a perfectly ordinary way, and I locked the door and stood in the quiet of my house and understood that something had shifted, and I did not yet know what I was going to do about it. What I did not know that evening was that Nora's brother-in-law had been watching. Patrick's younger brother, Dermot, was 48 and lived 20 minutes away and had never fully resolved his feelings about his brother's death into anything workable. He visited Nora every few weeks with the stated purpose of helping, and the actual purpose, I would come to understand, of maintaining a claim, not romantic. Nothing that simple, something territorial and grief-shaped. A need to remain the closest living link to Patrick, to be the person Nora needed most. He had a key to her house. He had opinions about what she did with her weekends. He had, I would find out 2 weeks after the evening with the wine, taken photographs from the street of me coming through the gate into her yard. She told me on a Wednesday. She came over in the morning, earlier than she ever had, and she stood at my door with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and she said, Dermot says if I don't stop spending time with you, he's going to talk to the neighborhood association about property boundary violations. He has photos of you in my yard. I want you to sit with that for a moment. He had photographs of me walking through an open gate to put sunscreen on a neighbor's back. And he was prepared to weaponize them. Not in any dramatic legal sense, not in a way that would survive scrutiny, but in the way that matters in neighborhoods and communities and small social worlds. The way a story, told selectively, to the right people, with photographs attached, can change what people think they know about you. He was going to tell the neighborhood association that I was trespassing. He was going to make it a thing. And the photographs, stripped of every context that made them ordinary, would be just ambiguous enough to cost Nora something she had spent 2 years rebuilding. Her standing as a widow who had handled her grief with dignity in a community where people were watching to see how she did it. I had a choice to make, and I had until Friday to make it. Because that was when Dermot had said he would make his calls. Nora told me this in my kitchen on a Wednesday morning, and I watched her face while she told me, and what I saw there was not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it, the look of someone calculating what she can afford to lose. I want to tell you, I responded heroically. I didn't. I sat with it for a day and a half, which is the amount of time I needed to move from angry to useful. On Thursday morning, I went to see Dermot. I want to be clear that I did not go to threaten him, or to perform some version of masculine confrontation that would make a better story but would have accomplished nothing. I went because I had thought carefully about what he actually had, and what it actually proved, and what it would actually do to Nora if he used it. And I had concluded that the most dangerous thing about Dermot was not his photographs, but his certainty that Nora would not push back. He had built his hold over her on the assumption that she was still the person she was the week Patrick died, grateful for any help, too exhausted to resist, too concerned with other people's comfort to defend her own. She was not that person anymore. I had watched her become someone else over 2 years of small, careful conversations, and I thought Dermot had missed it. I told him that. Not unkindly. I told him that the photographs showed a man walking through a gate that was open because the owner of the gate left it open, and that the neighborhood association would find them exactly as meaningful as they were, which was not very. I told him that I understood he was grieving his brother, and that his impulse to protect Nora came from a real place, and I was not dismissing that. And then I told him that Nora was not a possession Patrick had left him to steward, and that the next 2 years of her life were going to look different from the last 2, and that the choice he had to make was whether he wanted to be part of those years, or whether he wanted to spend them standing outside her fence taking photographs of things he didn't understand. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "She's all I have left of him." I said, "I know. That's why what you're doing is going to cost you her." He did not make the calls Friday. I don't know what Dermot is going to become. I don't know whether that conversation reached anything permanent in him, or whether it was temporary and situational. What I know is that he sent Nora a text on Saturday morning, she showed me, standing in my kitchen with her coffee, that said only, "I'm sorry. I'll do better." She texted back one word, "Okay." She stared at her phone for a moment, and then set it down and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Not relief, not victory, something quieter and more complicated. The face of someone stepping through a door they have been standing in front of for a long time. We have not defined anything. I want to be honest about that, because I think honesty is the only thing left to be. We are 2 people in their 40s who have been neighbors for 6 years and who are now, carefully and without rushing, learning the difference between knowing someone and knowing someone. She came over for dinner last Tuesday. I went to one of her student readings on Thursday night and sat in the back of a school auditorium, listening to teenagers read their own words. And twice I looked over at her where she was sitting at the side of the room, and she was already looking at me. And we both looked away. And it was the least complicated thing that has happened to me in months. I think about Patrick sometimes. Not with guilt, or not only with guilt. I think about the wave, the easy one that meant I see you, neighbor. I think about what it would mean to be the kind of man who deserved to inherit something from that wave, even without intending to. I think about whether generosity can travel between people who never met, whether one person's goodness can become another person's obligation, whether I owe Patrick's memory something more than what I already gave it. I don't have answers. I have a gate that opens both ways now. I have a woman who says my name from across a fence and means it as a welcome. I have a neighbor who is becoming something I don't have a clean word for yet, and I am being careful with that something in a way I have not always been careful with things that mattered. I am learning that you can know someone's coffee order for 5 years and still be at the beginning of understanding them. I am learning that grief makes people harder to see clearly, including yourself, and that the clearing takes longer than anyone tells you and arrives in smaller moments than you expect. I am learning that a gate between 2 yards is just a gate, and what it means is entirely determined by whether it's open and whether you walk through. Have you ever stood at the edge of something that felt wrong on the surface and right underneath it, and had to decide whether you trusted your surface read or your gut, and found out later which one was actually telling you the truth? Have you ever watched someone heal in real time and realized, somewhere in the middle of watching, that you were healing too, and that you hadn't known until that moment that healing was something that could happen to you alongside someone else without either of you planning it? Tell me what that looked like for you. I'm going to read every single one. Subscribe. These are the stories I'm going to keep telling